Hey guys, welcome back. I had a couple of guys, including a good friend of mine, request that I do a video on soldering. Joe's Auto Electric. So yeah, we do a fair bit of soldering here. So I've been doing this stuff since I was a kid. I didn't mention this. I guess I don't think in any of the videos or whatever. But my father was actually he had taught me how to solder when I was probably about 6 years old. And what I've come to realize as I got older is a lot of people actually don't know how to solder. You know, they're for some reason intimidated by doing it. It's very simple, and I'm going to show you guys how in this video, okay? And I'm going to show you a couple of different ways you can do it as well. Soldering is something, if you're working on obviously wiring, things of that nature, soldering is very important. I use it for my automotive repairs, obviously, and I also use it for other stuff as well. One of my hobbies is building radio-controlled military vehicles, and doing such requires a lot of wiring and stuff like that. So things like this nature, I'll show you. Like, see this little motor here? Just give you an idea of the size of this. I got a regular fuse here, and if you look, you can see that this is a very, very tiny gear reduction motor. And if you look here at the points of the motor, at the back of the motor here, where you would solder your electrical leads to, they're extremely small. Okay, see the difference in if you can see on the fuse here compared to the size of that. So depending on what you're soldering, you're going to require different types of tooling. Okay, it's like anything else, having the right tool for the job. I got to shut these notifications off. Okay, so where to start? Well, most of the time what you're going to do with automotive is you're going to have problems like this. Okay, you're going to have broken wires, things of this nature, which are very easy to work with, you know, and to solder. Now most guys, I shouldn't say most guys, that's really not fair. A lot of guys use butt connectors. We're all familiar with them. It's those things that wind up coming to our shop and usually causing the problem that the customer is complaining about: bad connections, oxidation, corrosion, whatever you want to call it, right? Broken wires because of corrosion. Butt connectors are garbage. I don't care what kinds you use. I don't like them. I'm not a fan of, I've never been a fan of butt connectors. The newer stuff, some of these guys are using some stuff now that has solder built into it, so when you heat it, it has shrink wrap and solder built into the connector. So you'll put it together, you'll crimp it, and then you'll solder it, or you'll heat it, and it'll automatically solder. I still don't much care for that. I'm really not a big fan, personally. But of course, that's, you know, to each his own, I guess. You know what I mean? If you're going to use them, you're not going to believe what I tell you, so you're just going to use them. I personally do not like them, and I will not use them. So that's my personal opinion. Okay, I believe that a good solder joint and protected solder joint is going to be stronger than any butt connector you can use. That's my honest opinion. I've only been doing this for 20-something years now, so you don't have to take my word for it, but you're not going to change my mind. So here's the deal, okay? I want to show you a couple of things. First of all, this is my, which needs to be cleaned desperately. I need a new tip. This is my my solder gun that I have for home, a soldering iron, whatever you want to call it. This is a variable controlled soldering iron. All right, it has a base, and this is a Weller. Very, very good little tool. I use this for circuit boards, and I also use it for little tiny connectors like this. It's only a 1/16 tip on here. It's very small, so it works very well to pinpoint you know, areas like this. Okay, you can obviously vary the power output as well, so you don't make it too hot for a component that you're working on. Now, all this kind of stuff is all well and good, but you don't really have to know too much about this. Okay, I'm not going to go too much into detail on this. What you're going to see, and I'm going to show you again for comparison. Here's the motor. Okay, here's the little tiny contacts that we're working with on the motor, and here's a typical relay. You know, this is, you know what I'm saying, and even the wiring. If you look at the wiring on here, which is very small gauge, it's still it's still more material to work with than what you're going to see here, okay? So what I want to do basically is give you a crash course in soldering. Things you're going to need: soldering iron, right? Make sure it's on and it's up to wherever you need it. If it's variable control, a lot of guys are going to use a solder gun, right? It just has a trigger on it, so it's two different wattages. Basically, it's whatever they are, you know, 100 watt, 200 watt, whatever they are, and they usually have two clicks on the trigger that you can control them. I don't have my solder gun here. It's somewhere in my toolbox, I think downstairs, so I'm not going to go get that for this. You don't need to see it. It's the same principle no matter what you're using. So it doesn't make really a difference what tool I'm using here. The other thing you can use is micro torches. Okay, these things are fantastic. Turn it on, nice blue flame, don't touch it, very hot. Any of these, you can solder with any of these. Again, you really don't want to solder wire like this with a torch this big. Okay, it's a little overkill, and it's hard to do because it's going to overheat the material that you're working with very quickly. You can do it. I mean, in a pinch, I would definitely use it, you know, no doubt. But using the right amount, right, with any of this stuff. So this big ass torch here, you really don't want to use for little wires. Can you use it for battery cables if you're putting new ends on, or, you know, soldering? Yes, absolutely. They work great for that. You know, it's basically like a miniature version. It's a butane torch, but it's like a miniature version of a, you know, a propane torch, I guess you could say, right? It's just not as hot, like MAP gas, that type of stuff. That's really for soldering plumbing. This is, I would say, kind of in between. It's not as hot. It's not really hot enough for that on most circumstances. I guess you could get away with it if you had no choice. Again, right tool for the job. If you're going to start with soldering, I suggest you buy yourself a nice gun or a little soldering iron, like the station, like this. Either one will be fine for, you know, for basic soldering work. You can do a lot with this. You could change the tips on here as well, just a little screw. What I basically want to show you guys, though, is how to solder properly. Okay. First thing, I'm gonna actually solder this, because this is a jumper lead that I have that I took off of something that was broken, and I'm going to make a jumper lead out of this. It's nice and long, 2 alligator clips that are nice and strong, and we're good to go. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that these wires are clean. Okay, if they're not, you can take a wire brush. Don't use a wire brush that's all crusty and dirty. Use a clean wire brush. Usually stainless is really nice, or brass, and give it a shot. Clean it up. The next thing you want to do is put the wire, make sure you cut the wires back far enough that you can twist them together. Okay, and what you want to do is you want to make sure that when you do this, you make a good, solid connection. Okay, you don't want them falling out. You want them all sloppy. Don't do it like it's a household plumbing. I'm sorry, electrical thing you're going to put a wire nut on. Don't make a mess like that. You want them like this. Okay, nice and clean. And what you're going to do, see, this is another little tool that we have that comes in very handy, and it's basically like having extra hands or fingers, right? So you don't need this, okay, per se, but I have it here, and it's just another tool I can show you. All right, so now I have my soldering set up, right? But what did I forget? Well, I forgot something. I forgot shrink tube. Now, a shrink tube is another discussion altogether. Shrink tube is in a lot of different forms. The type that I like to use is this one. It's very heavy. You can see I'm squeezing it. It doesn't just fall and collapse. This is double walled, and it has adhesive inside. The point of using this for what I do is that it protects the environment. It protects the wire from the surrounding environment, whatever that may be. Okay, whether it's under the hood or under the dashboard or whatever the case is, this is not going to get corroded due to moisture and oxidation. Okay, it's not going to happen because of the adhesive quality that's inside the shrink tube. All right. So now once I do this the right way, I put the shrink tube on here. All right, and I have my wiring twisted together, as you can see. Now I'm just kind of putting this up. I could feel it near my face. Don't touch yourself with this thing. You will really regret it. and I could feel the heat radiating off it. It's nice and hot. Okay, that's what you want. Now, this wire here I can use the torch for, but I want to show you guys how to do this with a solder gun, all right, or soldering iron. Here's the next flux. All right, now I use a variety of different types. This is a liquid. I have some Kester's flux there as well. This is open, so I'm just going to use this to show you. Flux is something you always want to use when you're soldering, because what it does is it takes the oxidation off of the metal surface. Now, sometimes you may not realize there's oxidation there. You can't see it, okay, but it's there. So this keeps the oxidation away from your work, which is what you want. So now what you do is you get your solder. You need solder also. This is 6040 rosin core solder. This is really what you want to use for electrical type work. This is thin. I use this for a lot of different things. But like I said, this will work perfectly. And you can see how hot this is, because right away you're starting to see the flux instantly. You could hear it sizzling. Okay, this is hot. So I'm just going to hold this here on the wire. I'm going to get it hot. What you guys don't realize is you don't want to start feeding this into the tip itself. You don't need to do that. The point of solder is to flow. If any of you guys have ever done any kind of plumbing, you heat the material, you heat the two pipes, the junction that's being put together, the union, whatever you want to call it, and after you put flux on it, you heat it, you get it hot, and then you feed the solder into the junction that you're working with, right? It's the same principle as what we're doing here. I'm heating the wire, and I'm just touching it with I'm just touching it right now, okay? To see. As it gets hot enough, you see what's happening? You see how it's feeding right into the wire? That's what you want. You do not want to feed it into the tip. There's no point to that. You want to feed it into the wire so it flows. Now, once it flows in, okay, and I'll get you a close-up shot here if I can, if it'll focus in that close. I don't know. Let's see. Is that helping or making it worse? You'll see that the solder has flowed all the way through the wiring. That's a solid connection, okay, and that is a connection that is absolutely not going to pull apart. Okay, I cannot pull this apart. That's what you want. Now, for my next trick, right? The next thing I want to show you is your shrink tube. Slide the shrink tube over. Now, again, depending on the size of the wire you're working with, the heat is going to dissipate more or less quickly. Okay. Do not do this on a battery cable and instantly try to slide the tube over it, because it's not going to work. It's going to absolutely start to shrink way before it gets over wherever you're trying to go. So just keep that in mind. Let it cool down. Use common sense for that one. Now I can use my torch, my lighter, and I can heat this, right? And it takes a little time because this is, like I said, a double wall. You're going to see it's going to discolor a little bit. I'm only going to do one side like this. And I don't know if you could see it real well, but the camera may not pick it up real well, but there is adhesive that's flowing out of here, okay? It's like a hot glue. Now, the other thing you can use is your good old torch. And you can just keep it moving. Don't stay in one spot, and keep going around. All right? And this is obviously much quicker because that's a much hotter flame, and you'll have the same result, okay? Now, once this cools down, it's going to harden a little bit, and it's much softer, obviously, when it's heated. And then it hardens up, nice. And this is absolutely solid. You can leave this thing outside. This is not going to get water in, and it's not going to get moisture in it. I've never had a comeback in all the years I'm doing this and using this type of shrink tube. I've never had a comeback for the same issue with the wire, where that wire had corroded. Never once have had a problem. If you want shrink tube, and if you're going to use shrink tube and do this the right way like we do, buy yourself the double shrink tube. You can find it online. I buy it from a supplier that comes to us. They come in all different sizes, all right? Usually they're color coded for size, and they work fantastic. So with that said, right, you have a well, I have, you don't have, I have a jumper lead now with a nice pair of alligator clips. Very nice. And very long length of wire. So I'll be putting this to good use at work if I don't forget it at home. Alright, so that's one repair done. I figured I might as well make a video while I might as well make use of my video time. I'll actually fix something. Alright, so now let's look at something else. Let's look down here at the same type of thing, right? This is going to work no matter what kind of gauge wire you're working on either, guys. The difference being, which I'll show you, if you're gonna, and we'll just do this for the hell of it. I'm gonna take this. I was using this in my relay video, right? So I'm just gonna do this real quick, and I'm gonna show you. This is a thin gauge wire, okay? And I'm gonna kind of just twist this together. All right, no shrink tube. I'm not wasting it on this crap. I'm just gonna twist that together. What I'm gonna show you is you need to use flux, okay? You always got to use flux. All right. Always want to put flux on there. It's only going to help you. Trust me when I tell you that. And what I want to prove to you is that you can use this torch for the same thing here. Okay, now you can see that flame. Okay. All right. So I'm going to just turn this so I don't melt the camera, and I'm just going to heat this a second. Now remember, this is a very thin solder I'm using, and you see how that's peeling back. You see how my insulation, this is why you don't want to use a torch really for this. Right, now you see what I'm doing? I'm just feeding it. I'm heating it, and I'm just feeding it, okay? Now, it's obviously easier to do this with the soldering iron, all right? Or I should say, it's more reliable with the soldering iron because you could focus the heat and keep it there. With this, I have to keep moving because if I don't, I'm going to melt everything and I'm going to make a big mess, okay? But as you can see, I have absolutely a solid flow of solder, okay, all the way through the wiring, and this is a solid connection. So if I was to put my shrink tube over this, I would have no issues with this connection. I would be absolutely fine with this. There's no problems here. It's not loose joints. What you don't want to do is what I see guys do all the time. I'm going to show you another trick too, actually, while we're here, before I get to that. If you have wiring that you need to strip back, and I don't know if you guys ever run into this, I do a lot of wiring repairs, okay? Sometimes the wire is hard, the insulation's hard, it's hard to peel it. You're trying to pull it with the cutters, they don't want to strip it. What I have done is this. Touch it with the heat, a little bit, and it peels the insulation right off. You can do it on any gauge wire. I've done it on battery cable, heat it up, and then I can slice right through it with a razor blade and slice it open and take it off, and it makes it real easy, okay? You could do it with a lighter. If, for thin gauge wire like this, you could just kind of heat the area where you want to peel it and strip it back, and you can do it with your fingers. Like I said, I've been doing this stuff a long time. These are little tricks and tips. I mean, I don't know how much it helps you guys, but it may help. See, now I got residue on here, okay? Now I would not do this if this was for a car I was working on. I would make sure this is very clean. I would use a little wire brush, clean it up, okay? But for demonstration purposes, it's fine. If I wanted to put these two wires together, all right, the way I want to do it is this way. You see? And I want to twist them together. What I see people do all the time, for some reason, I don't know why they do this, is they put them like this, and then they twist them. Okay, they do this, and then they twist them over like that and push them like that. I see this all the time. Or they put a wire nut on it. That drives me absolutely up a wall. You don't do it that way. That's not the way to do it. Okay, you do it this way. You put it together, and you would twist the wires this way. And you would make it a tight, solid connection. You don't want it to look like crap. You want it to look nice and neat. Then, again, you would take your flux. You would touch the wires with a little bit of flux. And it's the same principle here over and over, guys. It doesn't matter the gauge of the wire. You want to get it hot. Okay, I'm very sorry about this. This is not normally how my soldering tip looks, but I didn't change it yet. Now you see I could feed it. You see I'm feeding it at one end. Okay? And it's that simple and that easy to do. Alright? The solder has flowed all the way through the wire. It's not just on one side lumped up and bunched up. The heat has to be, it has to be enough heat for the solder to flow from wherever you're feeding it through the wire, through all the strands and through the wire, so it's a solid connection. I've seen guys solder and not have a good connection on the solder joint, and it would actually pull apart. It's very hard to actually accomplish that, in my opinion, to do that. You're not taking your time and doing it right. I'll show you something else. Now here's a fuse. Okay, if you look at the blades of the fuse, you can see that. You see where I'm scratching it? Can you see that in the camera? Hopefully you can. You see where I'm scratching? You see where it's getting shiny? Okay, there's just coating on the metal. Okay, you can actually see it coming off on the paper. See the coating? I'm going to show you. Look at the difference between the left and the right. You see how much cleaner it is? Okay, so I scratched it up. I could solder right to my fuse if I want to, right? Or maybe I can make some fuse jumpers or something, or whatever. So it's not just wires that you're going to be soldering, right? It might be brass, it might be whatever. I do this, like I said, for my hobby as well. I do a lot of soldering. I make custom parts for the tanks out of brass. I've made all kinds of stuff for them. So this is a waste of a fuse, but it doesn't really matter. I'm doing it for the good of a video. But I want to do it. I want to do it with this. I don't want to make a. I want to be able to have you guys see what I'm doing. So I'll take this, and I'll let the finger hold the fuse for me. Okay. I don't remember if I put flux or not on here. I'm going to put some more. Put a little flux on it. Now it's the same thing. If I want to solder a wire to here, okay. This is another mistake that a lot of guys make. Say that I wanted to solder. I don't know, this wire to here, right? A lot of guys would be holding the wire here and trying to solder. That's not how I would do this. Okay, these are little tips that I could give you that I've learned over the years. Little things. I'm going to show you. I'm going to show you what I'm talking about and why I do things the way I do them. Right? Now, again, I'm not doing the cleanest work here because I'm just kind of demonstrating, but say that I wanted to solder for whatever reason, you wanted to solder a piece of wire to here. Here's how I would go about it, okay? I would heat it. Need to heat it. So I'd get my soldering iron here and get this hot, and then I would start feeding. You see how it's taking to the right to the metal? That's because it's clean and it's got flux on it. Okay, if you didn't clean it and didn't have flux on it, you would have a problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this wire here that already has some solder on it, because this is how I would do it. Okay, I would take my wire, I would heat the wire, and I would get solder flowing on that wire. I would have solder already flowing on here onto my fuse, right? Because that's what we're soldering to. And then I would touch them together. Now, because you already have solder bonded, the metal's clean, it's been fluxed. This is clean, it's been fluxed, and it's got solder on it. So now once you do that, all you have to do is put the two pieces together, touch them with the soldering iron, heat the solder, or reheat the solder, and let it recool, and you have a solid connection again. Alright? These are all little things, man, but believe me, if you don't know, and I've seen plenty that don't know, you'll make a mess of things. Now obviously I showed you these little connections on the motor here. I'm not actually ready to, this is for a turret on a tank that I'm making a piece for, but I don't actually have the wiring to solder to here. But again, it's going to be a little wire like this gauge, okay, like 24 gauge wire. And when I'm ready to solder to this, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. I'm going to clean this connection, okay, both connections. I'm going to put a touch of flux on there, and I'm going to touch the tip right about, I'll actually show you. I'm actually not going to hold it on here because it's pretty tight, it's pretty small. I'm going to just hold it against here on the side, let it heat up a second. And again, you don't want to keep a lot of heat on this. You can keep some heat here, feed the solder, and then I'm going to put my wire and I'm going to solder it to I'm going to put the solder in, on the wire as well, and then touch together, and it's going to be done. The other way you can do something like this, if you wanted to, if you notice there's holes in there's little tiny holes inside the connection there. What you could do with these as well is you could actually feed the wire through the hole, and you could solder it that way. There's really no reason to do that. It's not going to break, doing it my way. It's fine, but I'm just telling you so you know you can do it that way. So really, that pretty much covers soldering 101. If you guys have any questions or anything about doing any of this stuff, I'd be happy to answer them. Actually, there's one thing I want to show you too. If you guys are working with a circuit board, I don't know if anybody that's watching this video, this is very basic, is going to be working with circuit boards, but if you are, there's something else you're going to need to buy. This is a solder sucker. Okay, it does just what the name says, it sucks solder. I'm going to show you how it works just for giggles, I guess. This is used for desoldering something. So say you have a circuit board with a relay you have to change, and the relay, obviously the pins are going through the board. They're soldered on the back side, right? So you have to take and heat that and remove the solder. If you don't have one of these, you could make a big mess in a hurry. All right. So what I'm going to just show you how this works for, on this as a demonstration. This isn't what you would use it for, but you press this in, and there's your release button right here. Okay, and this is your tip. This is actually heat resistant. See how well that works. So if I wanted to take this solder off this thing, right? I wanted to remove the solder joint. I would again heat this, but I'm going to pretend that this is on a circuit board. So I'm heating it. I don't know if you saw that. I'll do it again. Reset it. But it pulled the solder right off the joint that I was working with. Okay, that's what it's for. Actually, I don't even think there's anything left there to pull off now. I'll try to heat up some more, or I can. Let's see. All right, and basically what it does is it pulls the solder inside the chamber. As you can see, there's no solder left on there. Okay, it's nice and it's just a coating. So that's what you would use this thing for. You would pull the, and there's actually some stuck in there. That's pretty cool. This thing works good. This is the best one I've ever had, actually. It will pull it up inside the chamber, so these have to come apart and be cleaned and such every once in a while. Here's a piece of it. It got stuck in there. All right. So this thing works fantastic. This is actually called an Engineer SS02. I'll show you the number. Right there. This is an expensive solder sucker, guys, but this is probably the best one I've ever used. It's small. It's got a very strong spring in it, and it's got a good suction as well. Don't know if I could really show you the capabilities of the suction, but no, not really. That ain't gonna work. You'll have to take my word for it. Let me see. Yeah, it works good. Anyway. It's one of the things you're going to need if you're doing soldering on circuit boards. All right, it's something that's very good to have. This thing I think was like 25 bucks or something like that. It's made in Japan. It's a really good tool. Anyway, Weller. If you're buying a soldering gun, I really suggest buying Weller. They're the best ones around. They've been around forever. For micro torches, you have a ton of options. This one is a Blazer that I have here. I have a Power Probe at work or two. I have some small. Blazer actually makes micro or pocket micro torches. They're really small. They look like cigar lighters actually, and they have a blue flame like this. You could solder with them. I've used them for years. They're great. They're not that expensive either. You can probably find them online on wherever. I mean they're out there. Just type in Blazer micro torch, you'll find them. But like I said, I recommend buying a Weller. If you're going to do soldering, buy yourself a Weller gun. A solder gun, because it's real versatile. You're going to use that a lot for wiring repairs. You could use it on thin or thick wire, it doesn't matter. If you're going to be doing a lot of fine work, or you want to get into doing a lot of fine work, I would recommend buying yourself something like this. I'll show you. I would would recommend buying something like this guy here. This is a this is another Weller as well. I forget the model number. I don't know if the model number's on this thing. I don't see it. Model number, and it's variable. As I said, you could control the heat output on this. Very, very nice little unit. Comes with a sponge, okay, which you're supposed to have wet to clean the tip, which I'm going to clean this. Actually, I'm going to change this tip. But in any case, this is just soldering basics, okay, for guys that don't know or are afraid to do it or haven't done it before. Anybody can solder. It's very simple. It's not like welding. I've had a guy tell me I don't know how to weld, so I can't solder. It's not the same thing. I do both. I've been doing both since I was a kid. You know, soldering is very, very simple. There's really nothing to be afraid of with it. You know, of course, like I said, if you're using something like this to solder, then be careful. This is not as forgiving as a soldering iron or soldering gun, simply because the heat is harder to control and focus on one point. A little bit of common sense when you're using this. Don't put your fingers anywhere where the flame is. Don't leave it on. That's one thing that it's a pet peeve of mine. If I solder something with this, I shut it off and I put it off to the side. I have guys that turn them on, have them running, and put them off to the side running. You know, still don't do that. That's a catastrophe waiting to happen. Something on fire, burn yourself, shut them off. The soldering iron, obviously, the danger with this is this. You know, it's hot. It's laying on the floor. You put your arm on it, and then you know you're alive in a big way, because it hurts really, really. I've branded myself more times than I can tell you with soldering irons over the years, and it's always my own stupidity that causes it. Lately I've been pretty good. I've moved on to burning myself with light bulbs. That's what I did today. But you know, we learn slowly over time. But I hope this helps somebody out there. I hope you guys, you know, for any of you guys that are novices with soldering, there's nothing to be afraid of with it. It's very simple. You can see the connections here on the relay that I did for you guys as a demonstration. Just very simple stuff. It's a strong connection. It's a solid connection. But please, if you're going to solder, use the right equipment and do it the right way, guys. Use flux and use the insulated protection that you can buy for the solder. You know what I mean? Always use the insulated ones, the heat shrink. They're not that expensive. Well, they are expensive, but they're very much worth buying. And flux, again. Here's Micromark's Tix Flux, this is called. It's from Micromark. This stuff is cheap. This is fantastic, fantastic flux for soldering. I've never had it fail me yet, and I would recommend using it. The Kester's also awesome. I'll show you. Actually, I'll show you that too. This is a bottle of Kester Flux. I haven't opened this yet. This is new, but this is nice because it comes with a dropper. Okay, steel dropper that you can just put drops on it. That's fantastic to have as well. So either one of these will work fine for what you're doing. You just want to make sure that there's no oxidation on whatever you're working with, and that will also, after you clean it with a wire brush, that will also make sure that there's no oxidation on there while you're working. There's a whole chemical reaction that happens with all different types of metals, and I'm not going to start going into that stuff because I really don't know enough about the subject on how it works to explain it. But with welding, with soldering, oxidation is your enemy, and if you don't use flux, there's times when you're going to come to wish you did, because you're going to have a problem. So if you guys have any questions or comments or whatever, you know what to do. I always try to answer whatever questions are posted, you know, to the best of my ability, and that's it. So I hope to see you guys soon. Thanks for watching.